Senator Rosenwald. Senator Rosenwald moves approval of Senate Bill 144. Is there a second? Second by Senator D'Alessandro. Discussion? Senator Morse.
Yeah, I don't know if the department's here, but I read in the notes that they were concerned, and this may have been before the amended note, about the financial situation. Concerned that there are no funds appropriated with this bill. Can someone explain to me what that means?
Is there someone from the department? Someone want to give it a shot?
So I don't believe there's anyone here from the department prepared to speak to this particular bill, but I did speak with John Williams about it earlier today. And I think that concern, Senator Morse, was one that they had expressed before the amendment was adopted. This amendment does allow them to use federal funds, either child care and development funds or Arpa funds, to pay for the cost of a pilot program. So the department's position is that there's no cost in this biennium. Now, if this program is made permanent, there will obviously be a cost in the 24, 25, and subsequent bienniums. And that cost is unknown at the current time.
Senator Morse.
And that led to my second question. Are these ARPA funds that are coming in some other way besides the billion that are going directly to the department? Or is this making an appropriation out of the billion in ARPA funds?
That I'm not sure about.
Further questions? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you. Just in reference to Senator Morse's question, that would make a difference to us, because the money would be coming from one pot or directly from another pot. So I think we ought to ascertain where the money's coming from.
Okay. Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also note in the amended fiscal note, it says to implement a 3-month or longer pilot program. To me, that's an open-ended. How long is or longer? Does this morph into a permanent obligation of the state when federal funds run out?
Senator Morse.
Yeah, and this is going to come up several times today because this isn't the only subject. There was $72 million that came into the state. I don't understand how it came into the state, and I don't understand how it was allocated to child care providers. That was my point of asking the questions I was asking, and I didn't get any earlier, and I'm not getting them now. So I guess if it's the committee's intention to appropriate out of ARPA funds in the billion category, I don't think that's where we should be doing it. So, I mean, if we're going to make a financial decision on an appropriation, a budget type appropriation, we should make it as that. But I don't think we should be using ARPA to hit for funds right now that are operating expenses. So, having said that, I just would like to know where that money went and how it was used, and if this is just helping direct it, because I believe other people would like to do that with other funds that are here that didn't come through us but went directly to a subject matter.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Hebert, and I represent the Department of Health and Human Services, a division of Economic and Housing Stability. And I'd be glad to try to answer your question, Senator Morse. The ARPA funding mentioned in this particular bill is known as ARPA funding, discretionary funding for child care, child development funding discretionary funds. That specifically is through the Office of Child Care, Federal Office of Child Care, directly to the state child care programs. And the state received two different pots of money, if you will. So one known as ARPA discretionary funds through CCDF, and the other one is known as ARPA stabilization funds, also through CCDF. The ARPA stabilization funds is in the process right now of being distributed. has about $49 million distributed directly to providers who applied for that funding with the state. The Arpa discretionary funding is about $29 million, and the state is currently working to develop a plan that should be released in the next few days that allocates where that money will be spent. The program put together quite an extensive stakeholder input process over 6 months to get input from our stakeholders to determine where the priorities really are for the spending of those funds.
Can I follow up? And thank you very much, because that's what I was looking for. How does this piece of legislation affect those decisions? Is it that money that's being talked about here?
Yes, and off the top of my head, so the enrollment pilot, for example, which is a 3-month pilot to determine whether or not expanding the eligibility above the federal poverty level up to 250%, which would increase utilization of the federal funds for childcare in the state. That's what the enrollment pilot is for. Currently, the state uses a absentee method for determining billing against the child care scholarship. So we want to look at a pilot that would change it from absentee billing to an enrollment-based billing, which would reach more families. So there's that pilot, and then the pilot to expand eligibility to the 250% above the federal poverty level for families. So it's really about utilization of the federal dollars for the Child Care Scholarship Program. Based on the data that comes out of that particular pilot, we want to determine whether or not we want to pursue additional funds within the budget to utilize more federal dollars for more families for child care in New Hampshire.
Follow up?
Are you already doing this?
The eligibility enrollment pilot is scheduled to begin later this month.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? And before I say, I'd just like to state, I sit on the board of directors for a child care services center, so I will not be participating in the debate or the vote. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When is the pilot for this bill scheduled to begin?
And I want to make sure I'm not confusing pilots. So
Okay.
this is the
This is the pilot to look at fully funding the child care scholarship based on enrollment and not
Enrollment.
on days of
So
attendance.
that particular pilot is the priority pilot, is scheduled to begin the end of this month and should last approximately till the end of May. And then when that is completed, we would look at a different pilot with respect to the 250% above federal poverty level for eligibility.
Further questions? Senator D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the pilot program would go for the 3-month period?
Correct.
Okay. And the funds would come from those discretionary funds that you talked about?
Yes, sir.
So if it were to continue, where would the funds come from?
Depending on the data, the outcome of that particular pilot, we would start looking at what we may want to incorporate into the budget in the future.
So you'd stop the federal funds at that point, and then you'd be making an ask for an appropriation from the general fund
Correct.
to move forward. And the data that you bring forward would be the basis of what your ask is.
Yes.
And what's that number going to look like?
We don't know yet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Morse?
Well, I'm just gonna, I support the fact that the department already supported this and they're implementing it, so I don't know if we just pass it and then when we get to the floor table it, out of courtesy, but it seems to me, this won't get through the legislature by May, and they're already doing it. So, that was my original question about when I asked earlier, are they already doing it? And 2, what bucket of money are we appropriating? I think we have to ask that on all these opera things. So I'll support the ought to pass, but I would think when we get to the floor, common sense is it's already happening. That's what the testimony was today. So I think we could table it out of courtesy at that point.
Thank you, Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still concerned about a 3-month or longer pilot program. How long is the pilot program?
The pilot program is 3 months, sir.
And why is or longer in the amended bill, in the amended fiscal note?
Believe the sponsor or original filer of the bill wanted to do a longer pilot, and the state took a position that we did not need a pilot longer than 3 months. And we didn't have funding to support any longer than a 3-month pilot out of the ARPA funding. So we, I think, settled on language. The intent is to do a 3-month pilot.
Can we strike the or longer from the amended note as a matter of record?
Are there any objections from,
Follow-up question.
follow-up?
So would this pilot program expand the eligibility? I heard you say 250%. Is that where it is today?
This particular pilot is with respect to the enrollment, so looking at the comparison of what the cost would be for the current method of billing, which is by absentee, or attendance rather. If we look at what would it cost for the enrollment, that is the purpose of the pilot, and then to differentiate between the two, seeing how much more it was expanded for families, how many more families were able to be enrolled in childcare because of the different method for billing. So if we finish the pilot and we're being able to take a look at the differential between those two methods, that will help us determine what we want to do moving forward in the next budget.
Follow-up?
And what is 250% of federal poverty?
And I apologize, I was mixing up the different pilots because we have 2 different pilots that we're looking at going on. So the 250% pilot would be to expand the eligibility for child care scholarship. So right now, the maximum amount for the benefit is at 220. I believe that's set by administrative rule. And this would expand the number of individuals who would be eligible for the pilot and be able to increase utilization for childcare and those federal dollars.
Thank you.
Okay. Further questions, Senator Hennessy?
Thank you. But just for the committee's purpose, that other pilot is not what we're talking about here. That's a different pilot. The 250%. And then I would make the motion that for a committee amendment that Senator Gaida proposed to strike out minimum.
Senator Hennessy moves committee amendment to strike out the words "or longer." A second by Senator Rosenwald. Any discussion on that amendment? There being none, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, motion carries. Now you're back to ought to pass as amended. Moved by Senator D'Alessandro, seconded by Senator Rosenwald. Any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor of the ought to pass as amended motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
And the vote is 5-1 with 1 abstention. And 5-1. And who would like to take this out? Senator Rosenwald. Thank you. Yes. Going on to Senate Bill 230. Practice of body art.
Move on to pass.
Moved by Senator Reagan. Is there a second? Second by Senator Rosenwald. Discussion? I will be voting against this. One of the things that's included in here is actually another position that's being added, but also I'm concerned about the indeterminable increase in county expenditures, which could have an impact upon local property taxes. Further discussion. Motion before us is ought to pass. All those in favor of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Nay. And so it's 4-3. Senator Morse, Senator Guyder, and myself. Senator Reagan, take that out.
Sure.
Next is Senate Bill 233, relative to bottled water filling stations in schools.
I move that ought to pass.
Senator Reagan moves ought to pass, seconded by Senator Hennessy. Discussion? Senator Guyder?
I'll be voting against this, Mr. Chairman, and the reason for that is not that I don't support this. I think local school districts are more than capable of making that decision on their own. They have nurses, they have doctors in communities and so forth, and rather than a state mandate, while I support this in principle in terms of the health of our students, I think that our schools should be able to make that choice on their own. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? I too will be voting against it, in particular for starting on line 19. Now, while I recognize that 28A either requires the state to provide the funds for any kind of a mandate or the local legislative body to vote to do that. On line 19, it states that the local building inspector authority pursuant to RSA 155A of school districts shall not approve the plans or specifications for a new public school building or for any addition or substantial renovation to an existing public school building unless the plans and specifications provide for, and then it goes down and lists requirements for bottled water filling stations. So I see that as a mandate because you know, you've got one individual that the law is stating what has to be. So really the decision is essentially taken away from the local community. Further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before us is ought to pass. All those in favor of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Nay. Vote is 4-3. With Senators Daniels, Guyder, and Morse voting against. And who would like to take that out? Senator D'Alessandro, thank you. Senate Bill 319, relative to vaccination status and wellness incentives. Senator Rosenwald.
Yes, thank you. I'd move ought to pass.
Senator Rosenwald moves ought to pass on Senate Bill 319. That's seconded by Senator D'Alessandro. Discussion?
May I?
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. So I think we all received emails over the weekend or yesterday from the New Hampshire Association of Counties and the Municipal Association saying that there would be no cost to county or local government. That is basically because this bill applies only to self-funded group plans. So, I mean, sorry, not self-funded, but the full risk group plans. So no self-funded plans and no public payer plans. And furthermore, as amended by the Senate, it's completely permissive. So the carriers would only offer this benefit if their actuarial work showed they would save more money than they would spend offering the benefit. So I think because it was passed on policy and there is no cost, we should pass it out of finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? I was just curious in reading through, it, what kind of incentives could they offer that would not affect the premium?
So the effect on premium that is illegal would be to rate the person based on whether or not they've been vaccinated, because that would be rating on health status. As you know, you can only rate on age. It's limited to how much you can charge older people and tobacco use. So what they could do is offer money to someone like they do for flu shots every year. In fact, like the state employees get, I think it's $200 if they get an annual flu shot, because the state has figured out that it saves money if people don't get the flu. So it's along the same lines, but it is consistent with federal law. It could save money on premiums, but that would apply to everyone who paid a premium regardless of whether they were vaccinated or not. Everybody would, if they were the same age category, get the same premium cost within that plan for that particular employer. It doesn't involve the individual market either. It's only what the state calls the HMOs.
Calls the what?
The HMOs. I don't know why they call them the HMOs, but it's the full risk group market only, and your premium wouldn't change versus whether you were vaccinated or not. Your premium could still only be affected if you were over 50 or if you used tobacco. Those are the only two rating factors. So if the carriers found that if people getting vaccinated saved them money, everyone in that group would experience a premium reduction. If they figured it was going to increase cost, they wouldn't offer it.
Thank you. Further questions, Senator Gaida?
To Senator Rosenwald, thank you. So are you saying that this program would potentially produce a reduction in healthcare premiums? I would love to participate in that program.
Well, I would love to participate in that program too, but I'm over 50. So,
I'm not saying.
but yes, that is the intent of this bill, because we know what the costs are. We know what the costs are for COVID hospitalizations in New Hampshire, and we know what they are on a national average basis too, because that's been publicly reported. So if the carriers figured it would save money, they'd be able to lower the premium, because they have to spend a certain percentage of premiums on claims, otherwise they have to rebate the customers. So that's the intent of this bill. It's permissive, and I think it could save money.
Thank you. Is there any reason why the healthcare carriers couldn't just do this now?
Yes, the insurance department believes that the federal guidance is unclear enough that the language of the bill was necessary to enable them.
Thank you. And a further question is, they use the word vaccinated in here, but vaccinated means many things to many different people. Does vaccinated mean that you've had one shot, two shots, a booster, two boosters?
That's a great question. The reason it says fully vaccinated is because that guidance might change in the future. This is a time-limited bill, but right now it means 2 shots of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine and 1 shot of the Johnson & Johnson. But if that guidance were to change to include booster, it would be covered without a change to the statutory language.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, the motion before us is ought to pass on Senate Bill 319. All those in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, motion carries. And Senator Rosenwald? Senate Bill 337. Motion by Senator Reagan ought to pass. Second by Senator Hennessy. Senator Reagan and Hennessy. Okay, and this is relative to emergency medical and trauma services data sharing to the for the purposes of analysis. Discussion. Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had had concerns with this bill. I contacted, or actually Senator Prentice contacted me and allayed my concerns. This will not provide identifiable data. What this is about is who is getting that data, and the privacy constraints are those that are in place and working and have been for a number of years. So for that reason, I'll be supporting this legislation. Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before us is ought to pass on Senate Bill 337. All those in favor of that motion say aye. 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 Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. And would someone like to take that out? Senator Gaida.
So there.
Okay, Senate Bill 346. It's relative to the Department of Environmental Services to conduct feasibility and impact studies for the construction of a pier on Hampton Beach. Moved by Senator Hennessy, seconded by Senator Rosenwald. Discussion.
Thank
Senator
you.
D'Alessandro.
I mean, the idea has merit. The question is the appropriation, and is that enough to make it, to get it done? I don't know, but obviously, anything we can do to enhance accessibility is important. And we got that wonderful recreation facility that we offer to not only New Hampshire citizens, but to visitors from all over the country. And this gives an opportunity for more participation. So I think it's a good idea. It's a question of, again, is it enough? And I'm not sure. I don't know.
Senator Gaida?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the answer to your question, Senator D, is yes. I'm on energy, and we had a significant discussion, and in that 150,000 was for the study, okay, and the coordination of that to be done by what's it called, the Hampton Beach Commission, I think it's called,
Yep.
as opposed to DES, and so that was agreed upon in discussions in energy. So that'll be supporting the bill.
Further discussion? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I would just make the point that the water is so cold out there that I think anything that keeps people out of it is,
It is cold.
I'm all about that. Better to be on a pier than in the water.
Any other further inspiring comments? Penguin plunge. Okay. There being no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 346, say aye. 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 Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. And Senator Hennessy, thank you. Okay, we'll go to Senate Bill 409. This is relative to disaster relief funds. We do have an amendment on this, and recognize Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer amendment 0526S, and Mickey is here. Mickey drafted this after we had this conversation about the problems with the initial bill. I said there is a way to do this and arrive at where we want to go, I asked Mickey to draft this and to get it to people for conversation. So, Mick, if you could, with the chair's permission, Mick, go through it so that it's clear to everybody how we took a problem and, reclassified it so that we did the right thing and got to exactly where they wanted to be.
So I do have the Department of Safety here to back me up if we have any technical questions beyond the amendment itself. But what this amendment does here from Senator Prentice's bill is introduced. In the first section, if you recall, the bill is introduced included adding a fiscal committee pathway of approval for a loan as an option for the governor, either council or fiscal. That was taken out of here to keep the process in line with how it is now, which was determined not really in need of adding fiscal to that. Subparagraph B on line 11 of the amendment, you'll see where it says per occurrence. That was struck in the original bill, and that was replaced with incident at the suggestion of the department to clarify the specifics of when a loan would be issued. And then the other thing that, if you remember from the public hearing, that drew concern of the committee was subparagraph D, which is not on the amendment before you now, which talked about in the event of the FEMA reimbursement not being in the amount of the loan, that the lesser would be paid back. And there was that concern of the state not getting full reimbursement back from municipality and who would pay it. So that's removed from the bill by this amendment to let the rules carry out how that would play, which would be the municipality would be responsible for reimbursing the state for any amount it did borrow. So the state would have a net zero end game in all disaster loans under this RSA.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Senator Gaida?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, did I understand that it's rules right now as opposed to statute
Relative
that covers the reimbursement?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Just for clarification, I know last time we had a discussion that with the belief that the governor and council could not approve. Could you just elaborate a little bit for those who were listening last time and as to why the governor or council can approve?
So this is relative to disaster relief loans, which there has never been a disaster relief loan issued under this RSA. This is only a couple years old, is my understanding. And that is a governor and council process. I think what you're maybe thinking of is the ability to access funds not otherwise appropriated as far as just direct aid. And that's something that we had talked about, the RSA 913D civil emergency that would allow the governor through council with fiscal approval to access general funds to, for instance, help a municipality with their 12.5% FEMA match. That's not related to this. So this would be money that would be issued with the expectation that it would be paid back in full.
Thank you. Senator Reagan. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there any reason why we couldn't put what is in rules now into statute?
No.
Just to make it clear, just in case rules somehow change?
No, there's no reason you couldn't do that.
Thank you.
Further questions? Senator Gaida?
I would propose an amendment that would in fact stipulate my concern and Senator Hennessy's suggestion that we put in statute that the community is responsible for full repayment of such loans.
Senator Morse.
All right, I'm getting a little confused, so help me out. So when I got involved this fall, because a lot of you wanted us to take a look as a Senate at helping these communities, I was told they can already get a loan somewhere in the state right now. They could have went last fall, taken that loan, and the community we were all trying to help said, we don't want a loan. You know, we need grants, we've already spent more money than we really should have. Can't they already get a loan right now?
Yes, so under RSA 21P 37C, this exists in statute now. So there is a mechanism for disaster relief loans currently. And Senator Prentice's bill clarified a couple of things, enabled a loan to be accessed when a governor declares a state of emergency. So it kind of broadened the scope of when these loans could be accessed. But this is still just a pure lending and with the expectation of full payment, interest-free. That is something amended by Senator Prentice's bill. Currently, the law was silent on interest, so this makes it clear that it's borrowing at no cost to the state with the expectation paid back.
Do you have any idea how many people have borrowed off of that fund in the past 10 years?
I don't think any.
Nobody.
Yeah, zero. So this is a 2018, I believe, or it's only recent that this loan program was put in place as it is now, and there's been zero.
I think the town of Orange might have done it. Because I was the sponsor of that bill that established this program, and it was intended to be paid back at an interest rate approved by the town and the treasurer. So we're now going to zero, but still it was intended to be a loan.
Sorry, Fallon Reed, I'm the Chief of Mitigation and Recovery with Homeland Security Emergency Management. So the bill that you sponsored previously, Senator, we have not done any award on that. There may have been interest, but no one has applied for it. And as Mickey mentioned, the big change was the zero interest because the previous one we drafted had it at like the prevailing rate or something to that effect. So that would be one of the big changes. And then also some of the concern that folks had with the way the language is and why they didn't apply is it requires a FEMA federal disaster declaration, which can take months, whereas I think the adding of the language where the governor declares a state of emergency, that happens almost immediately or could happen immediately, which would open up the funding very quickly.
Senator Gaida?
Yeah, I think one of the concerns was that I think the original bill required FEMA
Yes.
to stipulate the amount, and as you say, that takes months, sometimes years. So in the emergency part of this, we want to get FEMA out of it and just allow the governor to make that declaration. Thank you.
Senator D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked Mickey to draft this based on what we heard for testimony and asked him to run it by everybody on the committee so that they would understand fully what we were doing. We're trying to take a bill that wasn't ready for prime time, or an amendment that wasn't ready for prime time, but put it in place so that the communities could do what was asked for, by the sponsor, and do it in an efficient and effective manner, and take care of the repayment situation, which was a concern to people, and the no interest was a concern to people. But the ability to get it immediately, it was the key issue because of the length of time before FEMA made its appraisal and got the money. This allowed them to do it up front. And we did hear one very troubling situation where the community went to the bank, I think we all recall it, and borrowed X number of dollars. They borrowed like $2 million. And I'm sure that they didn't get that at zero interest. So we had a situation where there was an opportunity for them to do that, but they didn't take advantage of it. And that's not a good thing. And this was put in place in order to address that situation.
Thank you. Senator Morse?
Yeah, and I was involved in that situation, and they thought they had a $27 or $28 million obligation. I just am not sure how, if someone had come in and applied to this package that we're going to approve here today for $27 million, does it automatically get approved, number one? And number two, the FEMA declaration was way, way down at that point because it was just opened and it was only millions. It was not anywhere near the 20-something. So even if it did climb to a number like 10, that difference is pretty large. And the cash flow in that community would never pay back that loan, in my being in the legislature. So I guess I'm trying to think this out because I understand what the community was looking for, and I thought we did it much different back when Senator Gatsas was here. I thought we did something that was much different. The legislature made a decision, funded it, but maybe that's not what we did. But I'm just not sure this is going to accomplish. I think it's an improvement today, but I'm not sure it's going to accomplish what the state is trying to accomplish. And they all want to help that community. But to what extent, even if you went to a something like fiscal, I mean, I don't think you would have seen an appropriation that was greater than like $5 million or something. They would have got the town open, and they would have got the roads open to emergency status, right? That's what they probably would have done if they had the authority at all. So I just don't want to send false hopes. That's my only point, right? And so I hope we're thinking this out as we're going along here, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you're right. You don't want to send false hope, but you want to create a way for people to get something, a methodology in place that they know is there. They can go there, they can ask, all right? Doesn't mean it's going to be accepted or not. They can go and ask, and the governor and council may approve it, depending upon the quality of the ask and so forth. And indeed, if they're asking, their premise is, in the future, we're going to get money back from FEMA for the disaster. We just don't know when it's going to come, and really, we don't know how much it's going to come. But we want to fix the situation immediately because of the problems that would be ongoing if we didn't fix it. And this seemed to me with Mickey's help, obviously, to put it together so that it could happen. Now, you can put it in statute. I mean, rules carry the weight of statute. I mean, there's no question about that. If you want to put it into statute, I mean, I don't have any problems with that. The idea was to develop something that allowed for these communities to access what they needed in an appropriate manner and to know full well they would get a loan. A loan would be at no interest. They had to pay it back. And of course, the premise is when FEMA money came, they would pay it back. If that was enough, fine. If it wasn't, then you'd have to pay the difference. So I think that the idea was to just address a concern that was brought forth. And I appreciate Mick's job in putting this together, given the direction that I gave him, and try to find out the most efficient and effective way to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether we should amend this amendment to talk about the repayment to the state when the FEMA reimbursement does come in. So it says we're going to loan the communities 0 interest up to the amount we think FEMA's going to come up with, but then it doesn't say that they have to pay it back quickly. So wouldn't we want the communities to pay that 0 interest loan back quickly when the FEMA money comes into them, rather than holding on to it forever and eventually paying it back? So I'm just wondering whether we need a committee amendment to this if we're gonna pass this.
Senator Morse, did you have a?
Yeah, I think something like that. I wanted a clarification on the 25% of local property taxes. Is that basically a number that's going to be for what they can use for payback, or is it literally 25% of what they pay in local taxes? That's as big as the loan could be. I'm not sure what that means.
And Senator Guido may be able to clarify this because that language came from the original bill, but that was to basically, a city's not going to ask for a loan for $3 million because they likely have the money to support that. But putting in this that the projects must exceed 25% of the property taxes shows that it's a significant burden on the community. But Senator,
If I may, Mr. Chair, that 25% is a trigger. If the value of the damage hasn't reached that, then you're not eligible. It's a qualifier for the program. That's all that is.
Okay, is there any objection from committee members to having a committee amendment that adds in the words about repayment? I mean, Senator Hennessy, do you have language that you would like to put forward for that?
I would look, thank you, Mr. Chair, I would look to the department for what their rules actually says right now.
yeah, I don't unfortunately have that in front of me, but I believe it's within 60 days of receiving the payment, and I can confirm that, because we put that within the rules.
So is there a motion then to have a committee amendment? And that moved by Senator Rosenwald, seconded by Senator Hennessy. Any further discussion on the amendment? There being none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. We're looking for a motion that ought to pass as amended, moved by Senator Gaida, second by Senator Reagan. Discussion? There being none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. Senator Gaida, take that. And I think as far as voting, I think that's the last one we'll be working on today. I'll take a motion to come out of executive session. Moved by Senator Reagan, second by Senator Guider. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. We are out of executive session. And Senator Khan, there are 3 bills that Senator Khan has that we will be taking up, not this week, but Senate Bill 387, 402, and 415. He has submitted amendments for, so just for the sake of taking up time now instead of later, if you could just bring us up to date on what those amendments are and the differences between the bill previously.
I'd be glad to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the record, Jay Kahn, States Senate District 10. And if would it be helpful, Mr. Chairman, for me to ask if there's somebody from the department to join me on each one of the separate bills? No. Sorry.
Why don't you go ahead and explain
Yeah.
if we need through questions to have somebody else, they can join you.
Will do. So Senate Bill 387, again, is the body worn and dashboard camera fund. And the request for an appropriation to provide matching funds for each of the departments in the state. Essentially, this is covering towns and counties. And the 3,300 officers that there are in towns and counties in the state. And providing a 50% match for a one-time purchase that would cover the procurement of body and dash cams, the installation and the operating system that would back that up, and the period of time not to exceed a 5-year purchase period, but that would be the what the procurement through a lease purchase would provide for. So in the questions that the committee raised in the initial presentation, where we suggested $20 million as a cost, you wanted some additional details on that. So Steve Lavoie and the department worked on that, as did Joe Hobecki, the chief of police in Hollis and the chairman or the president of the Chiefs Association in the state. So they identified 4 departments that had either purchased or entered into a lease purchase arrangement for systems in the last 2 years. They arrived at a per camera cost of $100. That's an all-in cost for the equipment, the storage device, and the lease purchase period of 5 years. So those 4 departments, I believe Steve Lavoie has shared that information with the committee. And you can see the $100 is the right around the average for all 4 of those departments. That would then come down to $50 on a 50-50 match, and that could be applied as departments need those funds. It comes up to being around $11 million. The extra $500,000 there is to carry the staff through the 5-year period of procurement, and that's how the $11,500,000 amount has been derived. So I think through the process we were able to tighten that up. One of the other questions that came up was should this be a single procurement or procurement through each of the departments? Chief Hobecki provided in his letter some rationale as to why by department is a better mode. Essentially, he's describing that the engagement, first off, the decision-making at the local level to adopt the cameras is a healthy process, and the involvement of the officers in the selection of the vendor and the equipment was very helpful in the acceptance that there was for the equipment, because there were demonstrations, bid proposals, they could evaluate the costs, they could evaluate the equipment, and take recommendations from others in the state as to the satisfaction they had with the vendor. So he felt that it was a very important way to get departments to embrace the technology, and that's part of the rationale then for not going further with suggesting how these be procured. And that's what you have in Amendment 523, $11.5 million allocation, which I think is well thinned down. You've got the 3 positions that the department is requesting to help support this program. And
Senator Hennessy has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. In looking at the amendment, I see the amount went from 20 to 11.5 million. You mentioned a 5-year period here, but I don't see the 5 years. And it also takes out the initial procurement language that was in the original amendment. So the way I read this now is that any department that could have body cameras right now is eligible for funding. I don't see a time limitation, and my concern is that we've dropped the dollar figure, but said they can pay. You're saying 5 years. I don't see the 5 years in here, and then opened it up to any department, whether they have previously purchased these or not.
So thank you for the question, and now I can clarify that, I think. That it is intended that each department in the state would have one shot at the grant pool dollars, meaning to penalize the department for having adopted the technology early and not allow them to be able to draw on the same funds that a late adapter uh, would, would have the benefit of accessing. So you're correct. It removes that self-selection penalty for early adapters.
Further questions on Senate Bill 387? Sorry, follow up?
Just to the 5-year piece, I don't see a 5-year in here. And just in my discussions with a local department, they have a contract for the body cameras, but don't have a contract for the uploading of the data. They do that at their local station because it's much cheaper just to have a standalone machine. So if we're not going to suggest that we have one contract for everybody to buy into, why would we say 5 years for a department to be covered if their contracts might not be for 5 years?
Some departments have purchased, but as you heard in the testimony from the chief in Hinsdale, these cameras do experience, they get damaged. They don't have a 5-year life. So he was suggesting that, and I think that's why the departments have indicated to me, and Steve may have some additional information, but the departments prefer to enter into this lease purchase so that as equipment wears, they're guaranteed to have the performance over a 5-year period. The reason to limit this to a 5-year purchase is that the technology is moving and changing, and they want the ability to be able to upgrade on some type of basis. So that's why anything over 5 years has been suggested begins to outlast the technology and the basis on which they acquired it.
But I don't see the 5 years in here.
I understand
Oh,
that.
okay.
And for for the clarity of this intent, you would like to see that in this amendment?
I was just wondering, based on your testimony, where the 5 years was.
It's what the experience has been in the field
But it's not in
to
here
date.
right now.
It's not
Okay.
here. And I think the way that and Steve might be able to address this, the rules have already been written on the program. And I think that the rules on it may suggest something about the procurement period.
Senator Guida?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm concerned that by opening it up to all communities, okay, we have larger communities with much better financial capability that already have camera systems. And by virtue of their participation, will take a larger portion of whatever funds are appropriated and potentially excluding smaller communities down, from getting their share. I would like to see something that says the communities that don't have cameras at all should get first shot, not to exclude the others. But these are rural communities and much less capacity in terms of grant applications and things like that. Your thoughts?
Thank you for the question. First, that those that already have contracts need to let those contracts continue till their conclusion. So those that don't have contracts would be first in the queue. They'd have that opportunity to be first in the queue. Whatever their decision-making process is could take a longer period of time because still 50% needs to be found at a local level. But that opportunity exists for the later adopters to have first shot because the early adopters are still running out their initial contract relative to those larger departments.
Senator D'Alessandro?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Khan, a city like Manchester has invested a fortune in these cameras. We're the largest city in the state. Obviously, the need manifested itself early on, and we as a city, bonded in order to do this. But under this provision, that would be we would not only incur the expense that's already been put out there, but we would incur the continuing expense because we wouldn't have an opportunity to participate, correct?
That's what I think we've adjusted here, is that they would have an opportunity to be part of the program. It is no longer specified for an initial, it's just for a one-time acquisition. So it does qualify every department in the state to be able to use this fund one time for procurement. So in the case of Manchester, which I think adopted in 2018,
Right.
in 2023, when their lease purchase runs out, they would then be eligible to use the fund. They're in here. There are two things about Manchester that we've discovered. One is that their size mattered, and that there is a lower unit price the more officers that you're trying to equip. And the second significant factor is that in the 3,300 total officers in the state, it includes the Manchester force. So this 11.5 is sized for Manchester and the total complement in Manchester.
Further question?
Further question?
But Manchester would be at the end of the line.
They would be potentially later, depending how quickly or slowly other towns participated, but it should be in the total $11.5 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Could you give us I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yes, I actually have two questions, if I could. The original bill had a lapse provision of September 30th, 2024. You took that out, so wouldn't any funds remaining lapse either at the end of fiscal year 22 or 23? Wouldn't it lapse by the end of the biennium without extending it?
Thanks. I'll try to reconstruct that history, but I mean, essentially, this fund will be in place until the 5th year of a contract. The department envisions that a department would be paying on that lease purchase every annual year. So it could be out until fiscal, the calendar year 2028, 29, that these funds could be still applied to an initial contract.
Follow up?
Yes, please. But wouldn't we need to say something about that in here? Or otherwise, any remaining funds would lapse by the end of the biennium, wouldn't they? I guess I should be asking LBA.
Thank you. Who helped me draft this? So Mickey.
I'm looking at Mickey.
Yeah, please do.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Senator?
Yes, if there were any funds remaining in here, it's sort of Senator Hennessy's question, I think. If the 11.5 wasn't encumbered or spent within the biennium, wouldn't anything remaining lapse at least at the end of the biennium, even if we wanted it to go to a 5-year contract?
Mickey, if you could please use the microphone, because those at home won't be able to hear you.
This appropriation is made to the body cam fund, which is a dedicated non-lapsing
Got
fund,
it.
so it would be
Okay.
okay.
Could I ask a different question?
Sure.
Thank you. So at the public hearing, we were told that the per month cost was $200 total, and that 100 would be the local department. But now you're saying that it's $100 per camera per month total, and so it's only 50. should we be confident in this new number?
More confident than you.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to see that you saved $88.5 million,
What,
but
what everybody is concerned, thank you, Senator. Uh, I think you're making a good point, and what our learning has advanced. Everybody's worried about the inflation on this equipment, that there's going to be short supply and greater demand. And I think it, in an honest way, at every step along the way, it was being inflated. What we stepped back and did, and thank you to Mr. Lavoie for taking this on, is we have real contracts that departments entered into. We know that they were able to do it at a $100 cost. We can assure the committee that that's a fair representation of the cost today. We can't predict that that's the cost that would be there 3 years from now. And that's what we've scrubbed out of this estimate. So there's a little bit of inflation here at about 2.5% per year. It's obviously not a lot, but we'll just see. I mean, the other thing that you pointed out at the last hearing was maybe every department, every officer in the state, maybe they won't take this. Maybe there's still some money left, and so this is a hard thing to predict with precision. What we know is that the estimated cost per unit and per officer is an accurate, more accurate representation.
I'd like to leave 387. Could you just give us a brief update on what Senate Bill 402 amendment does?
I certainly will. And I just wanted to point out on 382, Senator Gannon, he's not here, but is a co-sponsor of that amendment and wanted me to convey his support. Yes, be glad to point out something about 402. And I wasn't able to hear your conversation on 409, but I think 409 is accessing a loan on the 75% of the funds that would be needed for the FEMA disaster recovery. Leaving that aside, this is not loan money. This is anticipating that towns will receive up to $50 million total in FEMA awards. There are two types of, first off, let's recap. There are 21 different towns that have 27 or 29, 27 or 29? I think it's 29 different requests from 21 different towns for these two disasters. So we talk about often, there's one town in particular badly affected, more so than any of the other towns, but the other 20 towns will be receiving some kind of FEMA evaluation on their flood disaster claims. And then there are two programs. So each one of those 29 claims has both a public assistance portion and a hazard mitigation portion. So public assistance would replace it as it was, and the hazard mitigation portion would replace it upgraded to what it needs to be given the experience from these floods. Both of those awards could be made. It's an attempt to try to put a dollar amount to this appropriation. That was one of the questions that you had the last time. Is this an open-ended? Can we put any boundaries on this? And based on the claims that there are, 50 million seems like a reasonable number. If it is a reasonable number, then the 12.5% that was being sought in Senate Bill 402, essentially half of the state's matching share, leaving the other half to the local communities, 12.5% would be $6.25 million. And that's how that's derived. And maybe Fallon Reed has some input relative to this.
Thank you. And finally, Senate Bill 415.
Yes. So from HHS, Karen Ebert and Melissa Hatfield are the two well-informed people of the current state participation in homeless shelter reimbursements. And again, based on our presentation a couple of weeks ago, what you had was two $9 million additions to the biennial budget, one for fiscal '22 and another $9 million for fiscal '23. We went back to, and I thank Karen Ebert for running the figures. You've got some information from her both in a spreadsheet and in a memo that details the fiscal '22 request and the fiscal '23 request. For fiscal '22, in order to move from $8.20 per day per bed, and that's what's funded with the current appropriation of $2.9 million, in order to get to $20 per day per bed on that same 960 beds would be a $4 million addition. Not 9, 4 million. For fiscal '23, that addition is $4 million again for that 965 beds, 960 beds. And for, do I have that right? Is it 990 or 960? It's 965 beds. Thank you. And then, all right. So again, in '23, 965 beds that get them to $20 per day per year is $4 million. The department has an additional number of beds that they would like to get under contract to guarantee that those beds are available in communities around the state. That's another 260 beds. To bring those additional 260 beds under contract is an additional $2 million. So you've got the total request for fiscal '23 at 6.25, essentially, $million for fiscal '23. And that would put 1,265 beds, 55 beds, 1,255 beds under contract.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing us up to date. It'll help us as we go forward, and maybe save some time later.
I'm hopeful too.
Senator Gotti, do you have a question?
I have one on this last bill.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed in the Division of Economic Housing Stability Budget Analysis and Request, they're seeking retroactive contract amendments to the $20 rate. So what we'd be paying for is services already rendered, but backdated to the start of the fiscal year?
That's correct. That's what $4 million does.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Khan.
Thank you.
With that, the committee will be adjourned.